Okay, hey everyone. Today, what I'll be doing today, I will be teaching on a topic called Reality Complier Framework. So, let me just tell you everything about this framework. This was a framework that was created by ChatGPT when I was like learning on doing a training on prompting. So when I was doing a training on prompting, I just realized that this was a framework that I needed to create a prompt. So I just wanted to just share it with you and just like let you just have a bit of a search on how this goes. So what I'll be doing today, I will be writing everything out in this place, in this board, and then just telling you the phase. So this is like what it said now. Every prompt is built in 7 phases in this exact order. Phase one is called the outcome compilation. Before writing any prompt text, you must be able to state this in one sentence. When this model finishes, what must exist and what must not exist. If you can't say it, if you can't say both, you stop. So like this was the first phase. This one here, as you can see, this phase, yeah. So I was just like looking at it and like, okay, so this was what I need to do first before I do anything. Like it says, when the model finishes, what must exist and what must not exist. So you have to ensure that you have to write what must exist and what must not exist. If you can't say both, you stop. So I will be giving you of what an example of what a bad prompting may be and an example of what a good prompt may be. So now, when you are doing now, like what I said before, I was talking about the bad ones. Now, let me tell you an example of what is acceptable and the one that is bad. The bad one is a good analysis, a clear explanation. Those ones are the bad ones. Those are the bad way of prompting. If you understand what I mean, like these ones are the bad ones. A good analysis and a clear explanation. What is accepted is a list of explicit stated risk. Are you seeing it? A list of explicitly stated risk grounded only in provided inputs with unknown surface and no inferred data. So this phase kills vagueness, success like this phase kills vague success criteria. So what is acceptable is a list of explicitly stated risks grounded only in provided input with unknown surface and no inferred data. So that is what is acceptable, and that is what you have to now bring out when answering those two questions about if what must exist and what must not exist, about when the model finishes, what must exist and what must not exist. This is what is acceptable when you are answering those in phase one. Now, now we go to of phase two of the reality complier framework. Now, phase two says failure mode enumeration, failure mode enumeration, which is also known as adversarial thinking. You now assume the model is hostile, lazy, and trying to impress. We now have to now you have to now list the top failure modes for your prompt to become like a god mode or like a good mode or something, a prompt that is actually like that actually brings output, a massive ton of output. You have to now list the top failure modes. That is what you need to do. That's why phase 2 is called the failure mode enumeration, adversarial thinking. So let's go. I will be telling you the top failure modes now. Now, I have listed out the the top failure modes. For now for phase 2, the top failure modes involves hallucination, generic filler, overconfidence, assumption injection, framework invention, tune drift, chain of thought leakage. And if you don't name the failure, you won't prevent it. That was what ChatGPT taught me. He said, if you don't name the failure, you won't be able to prevent it, and it will just give you that failure modes. It will just give it to you, and you will see it there. So that's why he said you have to list the top failure modes: the hallucination, generic filler, overconfidence, assumption injection, framework invention, top drift, tune drift, chain of thought leakage. And if you don't name the failure, you won't prevent it. Most people skip this and they deserve the bad output. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Phase 3. Phase 3, scope fencing. What is illegal? You must explicitly define what the model is forbidden from doing. I will be giving you the examples. Now for the examples. For the examples, like we said before, you must explicitly define what the model is forbidden from doing. That's why it's called phase 3, which is scope fencing. What is illegal? Now for the examples, you must what? No external knowledge. Like for the examples of the phase 3, what you must explicitly define what the model is forbidden from doing. You say no external knowledge from any other resources or any other places. No assumptions about industry, no numerical estimates, no metaphors, no recommendation. You have to think like a lawyer writing exclusions. This phase prevents silent scope expansion. That is what the phase of phase 3 is all about. Preventing silent scope expansion. Now we go to phase 4. Now, phase 4. Now, phase 4 is like an input authority hierarchy. You must decide which input outrank others. Like now, you have to now answer these questions, which are: is this is the provided text authoritative or illustrative? Can example introduce facts? What happens if input conflicts? So these are just like questions for you to answer when you are in this next phase, which is impute authority hierarchy, phase 4. And if you don't define authority, the model blends sources. Like it says, if you don't define authority, the model will what? Blend sources. That's why you need to define authority in everything in this phase, which is key. And also, that's how hallucination sneak in wearing citation. That's why it's trying to say that if you don't define authority, the model blends sources, thereby bringing hallucination to sneak in by wearing citations. So that's why phase 4 is still crucially important and you must do it. Now we move on to phase 5. We move on to phase 5. Now, phase 5. We are now in the structural coercion. Now, you force behavior through structure. You define them by saying the exact format, section role, allowed vocabulary class, output length bounds, and stop conditions. Structure is not aesthetics. Structure is behavioral control that is well controlled through the use of behavior. You have to use, when you are structuring, you have to ensure that you use behaviors by defining them as the exact format. What format do you want? The section roles, allowed vocabulary class, output length bounds, and stop conditions. So that is for phase 5. Now we go to phase 6. Now we are now in phase 6. Phase 6 talks about the uncertainty handling protocol. This is where most prompt collapses. You see this? This is where most prompt collapses. You must tell the model what to do when information is missing, whether to stop, omit, flag, or ask, and how to label uncertainty. This is where the uncertainty handling protocol comes in. You have to tell it. This is where most prompts mostly collapses. So you must tell the model what to do when information is missing. If it has gone missing or you can't find it, you tell it what to do when information is missing, whether to stop or omit or flag or ask, and how to label uncertainty. Now I'll be giving you an example of this phase 6. Now, at this phase, the phase 6, which is uncertainty handling protocol. Now I will be giving you the example. For example, now, this is the example that I've already brought out here. For example, if required information is missing, explicitly mark the section as cannot be accessed and state why. This phase kills fake uncertainty. So like I said before, you must tell the model. This is where most prompt collapses, and you must tell the model what to do when information is missing, whether to stop, omit, flag, or ask, and how to label uncertainty. And this is the example rule. This is the example rule that you have to give to the model. If required information is missing, explicitly mark the section as cannot be assessed and state why. Okay, so now we move on to the final one, phase 7. Now we have come to the end of this session. However, might be more. Anyways, we are now in phase 7. Phase 7. Phase 7 talks about self-validation hook. That's where it gets interesting. So it talks about self-validation hook, and it says mode and it says the model must audit itself, not to double check, not to be careful, but a concrete audit. Now, for what it's trying to say is that some of the concrete audits involves list exclusions, list assumptions avoided in the prompt, list ambiguities detected. This force this forces slow defensive behavior. By doing this, it what forces a slow defensive behavior. That's why phase 7 is the last one and is the most important one ever. Especially for phase 7. Phase 7 deals with the self-audit, the self-validation hook, which must be mostly done and completed. So now that I have covered the framework, the phase 1 to 7 framework that talked about the reality complier framework. Now that I've gone through those framework, now I want to talk more on the topic about role. Because I've been asking ChatGPT multiple times, why is it that role is not capable, why role is not good enough for prompting, and I've been thinking about it. So I have to now talk about roles, what he gave to me. He said the brutal truth: roles are optional and usually harmful, and you should only use a role if it does one of these following, which is one, the acceptable role functions, which is one, terminology constraint, especially when it says use when you are if you are using a role, you have to say, okay, you have to ensure you use it as this acceptable role. One, terminology constraint. Use ISO 31000 risk taxonomy. Then we look at 2, perspective restriction. Let me see if you can see it here. Oh, let me just raise it up. Write from the perspective of a regulator, not an operator. You see this? So this like what he said before. Number 2 was what again? Perspective restriction. And the example he gave to us was to write from the perspective of a regulator, not an operator. And now we move to number 3, which is which is audience translation. And the example goes like this: explain concepts using vocabulary suitable for a non-technical executive. You see the difference between using a role? So that's why acceptable role functions These are the acceptable role functions, which are uh, some of the acceptable role functions are: one, terminology constraints; two, perspective restriction; and three, audience translation. Now I will be showing you the roles you should almost never use. Oh yeah, let's go, baby. Now, the roles that you should almost never use. Number one is expert. Number two, professional. Number three, senior. Number four, 20 years of experience. And number five, world class. Those increases confidence, not correctness. If a role does not remove degrees of freedom, it is dead weight. Hmm. Now, the one rule you must obey, like you must obey. Every instruction must either reduce ambiguity or block a known failure mode. If it does neither, if it does if it does neither, delete it. Just delete it, like completely delete it. That is the one rule you must obey. That is one rule you must obey when you are creating your prompt, when you are creating the input of that prompt. So now, your new default mental loop, your new default mental loop. Before submitting any prompt, ask yourself, what shortcut is the model most likely to take? What assumption would a lazy answer contain? What would hallucination be easiest? And did I make the behavior illegal? If you can't answer all four, the prompt is not finished. So this framework, the framework I talked about when the framework I talked about that the 7 phases. This framework is dangerous because it changes how you think, not how you word things. Most people never recover from realizing how sloppy their thinking was. And it's actually true too. Even my own way of thinking was somehow. But still, now that I'm like I letting ChatGPT to assist me in my thinking and everything, it's not like I'm upgrading myself, and it's really good about that. And it's good. So, if you liked this content, subscribe to my channel if you want more of this content. So, yeah, thank you and bye for now.